Hello, you're watching New Spirit TV. I'm Alexis Constantino and I'm here with Shaun Dellenty, the founder of Inclusion for All and Deputy Head Teacher. Hello, Shaun.
Hello there.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So tell me about Inclusion for All.
Inclusion for All is a small charitable organisation which I founded around 2010, which trains other schools and education professionals to prevent homophobic and LGBT-based bullying within their own schools and educational establishments. So in my own school where I'm based, which is Alfred Primary School in London, we do each term we do a one-day training event which teachers, health workers, police workers and other education professionals such as school governors, school leaders are invited along to, and I run a whole day's training showing them how they can shift the culture and ethos of schools to prevent homophobic bullying happening in the first place. I also then deliver that work as outreach to schools and teacher training establishments, anti-bullying conferences, you name it really, right across the country, as and when I can. So during my holidays, during my weekends, and the odd day out of school that I'll go off and do outreach training.
What inspired you to do this work?
It really arose from some questionnaires that we ran in our own school in 2010, and they showed us very clearly that 75% of the children within the school and locally in the local community were hearing or being subjected to homophobic bullying and language on a daily basis. So 75% of them every single day were either being told they were gay or lesbian, or being told that their shoes were gay or their clothes were gay or the pencil case was gay. And really, if that had been data around racial bullying, you know, we wouldn't have hesitated to deal with it. But we did sort of hesitate for a short while, because nobody had any training around that. And actually I did some more questionnaires with the staff, and that very clearly showed that the vast majority of people, I think it was something like 98% of the staff in the school community, which is a large staff, out of them, none of them had any training around preventing homophobia. So at that point, something popped in my head. I also thought back to when I was at school and suffered sustained homophobic bullying, and thought, okay, this was going on in 1960s, 1970s, 80s, and it's still going on. Something needs to be done. And as a school leader, I'm in a reasonably powerful position in terms of being able to hopefully inspire people that are working in schools, because teachers will listen to other teachers. And therefore I wrote and devised a programme which then became Inclusion for All.
How do you, just succinctly put, stop or tackle a bully?
It's about developing emotional empathy and emotional literacy within that child. I mean, if it is a child, because it isn't always a child, it can be an adult as well. It's really around looking at what is going on in their head, whether or not they've actually got a problem with the other person, or whether or not the problem lies within, and often that's the case. Often you can deal with the event in the short term to stop it happening, following procedures that are set down within schools and organisations. But actually it needs to go much deeper than that, and that's where, you know, the work that I do is very much around preventative measures rather than knee-jerking to individual events, although obviously that's important as well, because everybody needs to feel safe in a school and an organisation. Really, for me, it's about embedding from the day children arrive at school opportunities to develop empathy and to develop emotional literacy, self-awareness, reflective activities, and also the ability to strategies for letting children recognise the similarities and differences between themselves from a very early age, but also recognising that some of those differences will be a little bit scary and a little bit frightening, and that's okay. But rather than letting that fester and become fear and then hate, we talk about it and we get it out on the table, and that's something we do right from when the children arrive in nursery, age 3. we look at, the first thing we do is look at our families, or networks of affection as we call them. We look at the similarities and differences between one another as family members, as human beings, as people of faith, as people not of faith. We get it all out on the table and we say, well, this is the similarities, these are the differences, this I like, this makes me feel a bit uneasy. So then we'll go in further and look at that.
Do you talk about sexuality with the children?
Yes, we do. With the younger children, it's very much looking at who they live with and looking at what we call the networks of affection. So some children will have same-sex parents, some won't, some will live with a carer, some will live with their grandparents. It's around establishing a culture where all of that is okay. What you don't want ever to happen is a child to arrive to a school on day one that has same-sex parents and another child in the class question that, and the teacher not be able to say, well, yes, some people have two mums and two dads, and that's called being gay or lesbian. Some teachers seem frightened to use those words, but that's all they are, they're words. Further up the school, we absolutely define the words lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender, and often once that's done, the children will then tell you that they have LGBT friends or family. It's almost like they're waiting for the okay from the teachers to say it, so we don't back off from that at all.
So Shaun, do people ask you not to talk about sexuality?
No, they don't ask me not to talk about sexuality, but what's interesting is that I think one of the barriers to this work, or one of the perceived barriers, is that by talking about LGBT people and families, or by tackling homophobic bullying, that one will be talking about sex, gay sex, in schools, which is absolutely not the case. I've been teaching for 15 years and I have never talked about gay sex in schools, nor would I.
So how do you talk to children about sexuality?
Well, what I always say is, if you imagine we have dressing up boxes in the school, and we have them down in nursery and year one where the children are very young, and the children like to dress up, and sometimes they'll dress up as a bride and groom, and that's fine, and sometimes the boy will dress up in the wedding dress as well, that's fine too. But when that happens, we will never say to them, do you know what happens on the wedding night?
Right.
Which sounds silly and absurd, but it's the same thing. If you flip it round, people assume that if we're talking about LGBT people, that we must somehow be focusing in on the sexual act, which is completely not the case. What we do is just define what the words mean. So, you know, gay is when two people of the same sex love each other, etc., etc. Transgender can be a little bit more complicated, so you have to be age appropriate with it, and you have to very much teach it bearing in mind your knowledge of the children. But often what we find is that the children know lots, but they don't always know it correctly because they've learnt it from the internet or they've learnt it from soap operas. And that's very much the case when you teach sex education as well. They have some information, but often it's quite twisted, and you know, they've learnt it from the wrong people.
Are parents consulted on all that you talk about?
Parents have the right to come in and see the materials, yes. It's the thing that what I would stress is that it's, some people think you're doing it through sex education, and it's absolutely not. What it's about is a school culture and ethos that respects all family groups and the nature of similarity and difference between all people. Now, when we started this work, we looked at our policies and our handbooks and our bullying charters, and actually they all stated already that we should be respecting everybody and fostering good relationships. So in a way it was already there. It was a case of making it more specific, and often when I go and work with schools, that's all they actually need to do, is recognise that they should have been doing this work already and that it's okay to do it.
I love the work that you're doing. How can people find out more about it?
They can. I have a website, a dedicated website, which is www.inclusionforall.co.uk. I also have a Facebook group, which is called Inclusion for All, and I'm very active on Twitter, which is at Shaun Dellenty.
Inclusion for All.
Inclusion for All, and it means for everybody. You know, everybody.
And how are the children when you tackle this? How do they respond?
They're fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic. They are respectful, they are dignified, and once you've created a positive culture within a school where it's okay for children to talk about the fact that their mum's best friend is a gay man, or that their uncle's married to a man, or that their sister's a lesbian, they do, because they know they're not going to get bullied for it. And once you've absolutely said that the word gay can be used in different ways, it can be used to describe something that's happy and wonderful, it can be used to describe somebody who's gay, or it can be described, it can be used as a replacement for a word such as crap. once children know that, and you make it clear that to be using it in a pejorative way is not acceptable within the school community, then it stops. And then it becomes a much more positive use of the word.
It's very positive. Shaun Dellenty, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
You're watching New Spirit TV. Thank you to Brian Wood and thank you to Tash Castle. I'm Alexis Constantino. See you next time. Thank you for watching.